no means no is good. It's a start, but that does sort of rely on a woman saying no, and then there's an implied consent if she hasn't said no.
Yeah.
So that's dangerous territory. Also, a no sometimes means a no in that moment, that then might develop and change into a yes. So I think we do need to respect the fact that these things are fluid. Your emotions and your feelings aren't fixed and they can change.
Hi guys, this is Sam from Fluid Social, and today I'm here with Minnie Lane. Minnie and I have had a few chats in the past, and we've done some work together before, but Minnie's got her own YouTube channel now. She's been featured in some of the Canadian news channels, and you've done a bit of speaking now in the media, haven't you?
Yeah, I've done a little bit here and there, yeah.
And so I'm going to interview Minnie about a kind of question that we've both been thinking about a lot recently, which is the sort of question of sexual harassment, street harassment, as it relates to a man trying to meet a woman in the day, or a woman trying to meet a man. But what is this situation that we've come to today where it's sort of hard for men to go out and talk to women without feeling like maybe they're overstepping a line or doing something wrong? So we're going to get into some of that. But first of all, Minnie, how did you become a dating coach for men?
So I think I was probably born to do this job.
Okay.
I've always been really interested in psychology and gender differences. I studied psychology and communication at university. But I came into this industry because I met a pickup artist in a bar. And
no names, I suppose?
Probably shouldn't name him. But yeah, and I was just so fascinated to meet somebody that did that job.
Yeah.
So we ended up in a big chat about psychology and the book, The Game, and my female perspective on it. And then he invited me.
Was that in the bar?
Yeah. And then he invited me down to a boot camp and asked me to be a conversation coach. So I started off as a conversation coach, and what I saw in the industry was that there was some good stuff that was going on, and there was an obvious need for men to have help.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of stuff going on that I really disagreed with. And so I didn't stay there very long. I was there for, I don't even know, maybe a month, and then thought, no, there must be a better way of doing this. And so I've been working to sort of develop my own methods that are in line with what I think is moral and the right way of doing things. And that's, I've been doing it for 12 years now.
It's longer than me. And so what was it that drew you specifically to working with men and not with women, the other way around?
I think mostly just chance of how I entered the industry, but for some reason it interests me more as well. Yeah. I've always been a little bit of a tomboy. I lived with boys at university. I quite like male company, and I guess I feel that there's more of a need for men to get help with this in general. I think it's something that more men struggle with, learning how to communicate. I think dating is hard for everybody for all sorts of different reasons, but I think particularly men who are shy, don't have good conversation skills, have a lot of anxiety around speaking to people. I think they particularly need help. So I guess that's why I was drawn to that.
Interesting. So do you feel like for men and women, if let's say you had a female client, do you feel like what you'd teach them is fundamentally different, or do you feel like the differences are more sort of superficial? Like, is the whole strategy that you'd use for teaching a man different to that which you'd use for a woman?
I think actually the way that I teach it would be pretty much the same thing, because I deal mostly with the inner work. Okay. So any sort of emotional blocks, any fear of rejection, and sort of working at that from the inside. Body language, self-esteem, it's all the same. There's no real difference in the genders. I think the main difference is that the onus still seems to be on men to do the approaching. That's something that is changing, but I think there's still a way to go on that. I think when women have come to me for help, it's a different problem that I see coming up. It's that they can't find the right man. This is just with the people that have come to me. This is just my experience of it. But they are struggling because they can't find somebody that's suitable for them. And I think men tend to struggle because they don't have the tools to actually build attraction. I don't know what your experience has been.
I know what you mean. So it's almost like women are trying to locate their, like, where's where's the guy that I'm looking for? And for men, it's often like more of a sense of insufficiency internally, that I just don't have what it takes to meet women in general.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
I'm not even focused on one, just anyone.
Yeah.
Like I can't seem to talk to anyone.
Yeah, and that is a generalisation, of course,
Yeah.
but yeah, that creates this dynamic where men will be like, I can't meet anybody, so anyone will do.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you see this on dating apps, is that women's problem is that they're overwhelmed with basically all men who would happily go out with them, and men are just like fishing and there's no fish.
And they'll go for men just,
yeah.
It almost becomes they just want some attention, like just a match. It's just like, oh my God, I'm attractive enough to match with someone.
Exactly, and so I think the issue there is actually men not being selective enough, and men not being selective enough is off the back of them not having worked on their own attractiveness most of the time. As you become more confident in yourself, you naturally become more selective as you start to build your self-esteem.
Very true. So you think, perhaps I guess a way of looking at that then is that men become unattractive to every woman because they haven't selected. Yeah, because they'd go out with anyone. So even the women that might like them, they can sort of sense that man doesn't have his set of standards, or he doesn't have a criteria of what he's looking for, and so he becomes unattractive generally because he doesn't have those standards for himself. Yeah,
he's making himself not a good catch because anyone could catch him.
Got it.
And most women aren't attracted to men who aren't a good catch. So, you know, make yourself a good catch.
So what do you think are some things, like before it comes to actually going out and approaching women and working like viscerally on your social skills, what do you think men can do to improve their overall like outlook and how attractive other people perceive them to be and they perceive themselves to be? What can they do to work on that?
Well, I think mostly inner work. There is obviously some stuff you can do about your physical appearance. You know, you can eat healthily, you can keep yourself in shape, you can dress in the style that suits you and is in line with your own style, or finding out what your own style is. You know, a lot of men are clueless about dress sense because they don't know what they like. And again, you know, work out what you like. Otherwise you're going to end up dressing like every other guy. So find your style, find out who you are, what you want in life, the inner work of processing any unprocessed emotions around women. A lot of guys have a lot of anger towards women, a lot of frustration. Some guys are terrified of women, terrified of rejection. Some people don't have any conversation skills. They don't know how to develop rapport through a conversation. They get stuck in small talk. These are all things that can be worked on and changed. You know, body language as well. You know, a lot of men are not very good at reading body language, and that, you know, teaching people to listen is a big part of my job. You know, and I'm sure yours as well.
Yeah, no, it's a massive game of patience. Now. It's like you really. I mean, it's like for us as coaches as well. It's like you have to train yourself to listen to exactly what the client is saying. You know, sometimes people will say something, and you kind of have to listen to the way that they're saying it to discover exactly what the issue is. Like I've had clients in the past, and they've said stuff like, I feel really nervous to go and like leap out and jump in front of a woman and interrupt her. I'm like, you just said leap out, jump in front, and interrupt in the same sentence. Like, now why do you think your psychology is going to be negative towards this action? You've just used 3 like negative terms to describe what you could have otherwise described positively.
Yeah, and don't do any of those things.
Exactly,
you know,
exactly.
There are ways of striking up conversation with somebody without doing any of those things.
Without leaping. But it's all, a lot of it's about how people are framing it, isn't it? It's like they have a visualization of what it might look like to go and talk to a woman. And when they frame that like, I'm going to leap out, interrupt her, jump in front of her, it's like, well, you've already created a negative version of what you're about to do. So it's going to be difficult to... Yeah. So we have to, like, it's all about listening, isn't it? Yeah, to listen to what's being said and also to what's not being said. You know, because sometimes people don't say what they mean. Yeah. This is, you know, one of the reasons why there's so much confusion, and it's so difficult to talk about it, because so much of your job as a coach is to work out what somebody means and to help them understand what somebody else means. And to some people, this isn't very obvious. You know, if you've been lucky enough to have good parents, maybe good education, and you've been taught how to communicate and read people and understand people, this is going to be second nature to you. Yeah. But some people don't have that, and they do have to have it spelt out. Yeah, completely agree. So what age do you think this can start? Because like I agree with all of that, and I think that this is one of the most important areas of education as a whole.
Yeah.
But what age do you think, for example, like young children go to school, some of them will have had nuclear families, strong male and female role models, and a positive upbringing. Other people would have been emotionally isolated, secluded. They wouldn't have had that love and attention. And there's gonna be an imbalance in the people that had the good upbringing and had certain things taught to them from a young age are gonna get ahead socially, and then that's just gonna I just see that widen, because it's like if you have positive feedback when you're very young, then you have more confidence growing up, and you end up just being socially confident. The other person gets left behind. At what age do you think a social education could start for young men predominantly, but young men and women, in order to sort of understand communication?
Well, I think it does need to be men and women, and for this to be treated as equal from the very beginning. And I think it needs to start as children start school. I think it's really, really important that this gets addressed in schools, because we can't, unfortunately, rely on good parenting. Some people are born into families where they get severely neglected or they get abused, and they're not going to develop socially in the same way. And then, like you said, this becomes a widening gap, because if somebody's a little bit socially awkward, they're going to hesitate before going into a group of friends, and they're not going to start building those experiences from a young age. And what happens is the fear of rejection builds and builds and builds until it's so big for some people that they're scared to even ask someone directions on the street. I mean, like it's not uncommon it is. I'm sure you come across it all the time, but it's not uncommon for men to have these problems even in their 30s and 40s.
Yeah, it's very common.
Unfortunately,
So, in terms of your experience of, I know you're in a relationship now, but in terms of your experience of having received attention from men over the years, have men come up and spoken to you outside of the conventional environments of a bar or a club or Tinder?
Yes, so not a lot, but I have been approached in the daytime. Some of that's been positive, some of it's been not so positive. A few years ago, I was approached in the park by somebody who initially asked if he could come and stroke my dog. And then I don't think it was a euphemism, it might have been. And then he asked me what book I was reading. We got chatting. And we ended up becoming really good friends. We went on a couple of dates and then became friends, and we actually live together now. So that was a really positive experience. I also went on a date with somebody probably a couple of years ago as well, and we met in the street. I was on my way back from a bus stop, and I was actually walking directly behind him by accident because I was just like lost in thought.
You do have a tendency to walk close to people, catching their wind drift, getting right behind them.
It's just efficiency, you know. So he sort of turned around and looked at me, and I was like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to be walking right behind you." I was like, "I'm not stalking you." Yeah. And he was like, "I wouldn't really mind if you were stalking me, actually." And then we just ended up chatting, and he asked me for a drink. We went instantly on a date, and
that's really cool.
You know, that was a really positive experience as well. Less positive experiences. These have both happened abroad, actually. But there was one time when I was walking somewhere quite early in the morning, and some guy obviously, I think it was in Spain, and a guy just called over to me, "Excuse me, do you fancy a shag?" And I said,
"No, thank you."
"No, thank you." And he said, "Fair enough," and walked off.
Okay.
Fair enough. You know, at least he was honest about what he wanted. And another time, a guy pulled over in his car and asked me for directions. I started helping him, and then realised after a little bit that underneath his map he had his hand down his pants. So that's not a very positive experience either.
Actually, just to go back to the first experience, for you that seems to be like, I feel like you've got a mindset whereby you can hear that and just be like, "No thank you," and move on. But do you think for some women, even hearing that, just "do you want to shag," for you, did that have any effect of making you feel like in any way objectified or like degraded? Or did you just see it as like, "Oh, he's a chancer, he's trying his luck, fair enough"?
I have to be careful how I say this, because I think it's not okay actually to shout out to somebody in the street if they fancy a shag. For me personally, I don't get too bothered about these things. You know, I could see that he was clearly very drunk, was on his way back from a club probably. He was quite a long way away from me, so there was no invasion of my space. He asked, in fairness, and no was an acceptable answer.
Yeah, it was.
So I'd say, don't ask people in the street if they fancy a shag.
There's better ways.
But I would say, you know, the point at which something becomes harassment for me is when somebody's either not giving me a chance to assert my boundaries, or they're not respecting my boundaries when I'm asserting them. For me, that's harassment.
Got it.
You know, but I also would say, don't assume. I wouldn't be sexually vulgar in public.
Yeah,
no, I wouldn't. I would say respect somebody as more than an object for sex.
Definitely. It's interesting though, like touching on that idea of harassment. So your version of like sexual harassment or street harassment is someone either encroaching upon your like space, like your zone, or refusing to accept the boundaries that you've put up.
Yeah.
So is that your definition? So like what might be a boundary that you put up to be like, no, I'm not interested? If you say that and then they keep applying pressure.
Yeah, so if I said no and then he walks over, I would consider that to then be harassment, even that act. And I think what's really important, and I think this gets overlooked a lot, is that people's boundaries aren't all the same. So when I say that wasn't harassment, I mean for me.
Yeah.
For other people, the fact that somebody said that would be extreme harassment. For some people, they don't want strangers to talk to them at all, even if they're being polite. Some people just don't want that. That's where their boundaries are. And we don't know where people's boundaries are. You know, for some people, maybe he would have said, "Do you fancy a shag?" And they would have gone, "Yeah." I don't know.
Drunk
maybe
well.
I can't imagine that would ever work, but that worked for you.
No, not that exact line, but
and I think so much of it is to do with the way something's said, who it is that's saying it. I think we're at risk if people don't learn to work out where their boundaries are and what's okay for them. We're at risk of it being left to society and to the law to assert one boundary in a sort of one size fits all. This is okay and this is not okay. And I don't want to live in that world. No. You know, I don't want somebody else to tell me where my sexual boundaries are. Yeah. You know, for some people, you know, I don't really like being touched by strangers.
I'll remember that.
but this is the thing. You know, you're not a stranger to me anymore because I've met you. This is the second time I've met you. Yeah. But you know, to me, that's enough. That we've had chats. We get on very well. I don't see you as any kind of threat. I trust you. So.
Good. Positive
feedback. I think there's a lot of confusion at the moment about what's okay and what's not okay, and I think that's because people are looking for there to be one answer to this. You know, is it okay, for example, for a male colleague to touch my leg or my shoulder or to touch me at all? Well, the answer is so dependent on the situation, the person, what the touch is for, who the touch is for, because that's something that gets overlooked in touch as well. You know, sometimes somebody can touch me for my benefit and sometimes they can touch me for their benefit. So for example, if I now said, "Oh, I feel like this is going really badly," and you went, "No, don't worry, it's okay." For me, that's not you sexually harassing me.
But then if I was like, "Oh, don't worry, it's okay."
Like that, then I'm like, what's with this joking?
And that's nuance again, isn't it? That's like that's listening and understanding communication. Because you would just instantly feel there like, "Oh, okay, he's now become not a sexual threat, but our relationship has changed somewhat," because that little squeeze at the end is an implication of sexual interest.
Yes, of the reason for the touch being for your pleasure and not mine.
Exactly.
And so that there's a different type of consent depending on the type of touch. And this is also something that gets really overlooked. And if we start setting guidelines guidelines should be guidelines, suggestions, not rules, not laws. Because you know, it would be okay for me if you touched me in a non-sexual manner for actually any reason. I'm quite a friendly, tactile person, so that's not really going to bother me. I have a very tactile relationship with all my male friends and colleagues. If I didn't like you or found you creepy, I might not want you to touch me at all.
Yeah.
If I fancied you, I might be desperate for you to touch me. You know, there's all sorts of different boundaries, and we need to recognise that people's boundaries aren't fixed. Even within one person, you're going to have different boundaries for different situations, and those boundaries could change. Yeah. You know, I might meet a guy at the beginning of the night, I don't want him to touch me at all. Then we start getting on, I start to fancy him, and then I might be happy for him to touch me.
Or vice versa.
Yeah.
You might like it at the start, and then he opens his mouth.
Exactly.
It's game over, straight out the gate. So this is sort of interesting territory. It's like in sort of the legal system and in law, we try and create clear-cut boundaries. Like this is okay and this isn't. Yeah. But this being a relatively modern phenomenon, or at least it's become of public interest, general public interest, the idea of sexual harassment and street harassment. Now we've got to figure out how we can create a set of legal rules around something as deeply nuanced. Yeah.
And unfortunately, we are facing a situation where that kind of has to happen, where people have to start making suggestions and guidelines of what's acceptable and what's not. And that's off the back of the fact that people are so confused at the moment. And, people are so confused because for hundreds of years, women have been repressed, really. And, again, that's a generalisation, but it's a true one.
Yeah.
And we're living with conditioning now where women often don't feel able to challenge men, and men feel a bit entitled. And that's something that we need to find balance in.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to recognise how far we've come. It's only within the last few hundred years. We've gone from women not being allowed to go to school and not being able to work, not being able to vote,
not being able to leave the house,
exactly, being treated so unequally. And we've come a long way. There's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm not saying that doesn't need to happen. It does need to happen, but I think it's really important that we recognise how far we have come, and that we look to the solution and don't accidentally direct our energy in an unhelpful way, which is all about blame and shaming. And people need to be told when behaviour is unacceptable, of course, and the correct course of action needs to be taken for that person to learn to change their behaviour. But we also need to recognise that a lot of men with good intentions are very confused, and I see this all the time. Men who want to treat women with respect, being unsure where the line is and unsure what's acceptable. So the emphasis needs to be on recognising that individuals have different boundaries. Some people, they don't really like strangers to talk to them. They don't like to be touched. Other people are more than happy for strangers to talk to them, and some people are happy to be touched by strangers. I think it's important to always err on the side of caution and not assume that somebody is comfortable with something. Find out if someone's comfortable with something. Don't assume. And give people, options for consent. Don't take away the chance for somebody to not give consent. And this is one of my problems with the pickup industry, is that a lot of pickup techniques that are taught are focused on abusing the social conditioning of women, I think, where these opportunities are taken away. So, for example, asking a girl if she wants to go for a walk, and then walking her back to your house without saying, do you want to go back to mine? I think this is a classic thing in this last minute resistance. What you've done there is negate her the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to come back to yours, or to give your consent, or to say, okay, I'm happy to come back to yours, but just so you know, I'm not sure yet if I want anything to happen. Or, these are things that I would expect on a date. If someone's invited me back to their house, I want to be told, do you want to, that's where we're going for a start. And then I want to be given the opportunity to make it clear where my boundaries are. If I have boundaries at that moment, I might not know where my boundaries are at that moment. I might be still working them out. So do you think the sort of language of pickup artistry generally would gloss up that situation and say, you're not trying to
ignore her boundaries and not give her a chance to say yes or no. It's just that women, I think one thing they might say, it's just that women, if you ask them, they will start thinking logically and they'll say no, but if you just take them, they'll be in the moment and they'll want to come with you. Do you think that sort of rhetoric that's used in the pickup industry isn't actually empowering men or women? Because it's giving men a sense that they need to like guide women through life, as opposed to giving them a completely level place in the sort of dynamic, in the social dynamic.
Yeah, it's like if you're feeling a need to sort of trap someone and manipulate someone into your agenda, for a start, like, why have you got an agenda in the first place? Like, it should be open for both people to contribute to what happens that evening, not, right, this is what I want, how can I manipulate her into getting what I want? So any time when you're taking away her chance to speak up and just forcing her into a situation is abuse. I think that's harassment.
Interesting. It's so nuanced, because I'm thinking about, I agree with that, but I'm thinking about different cultures now. I'm just wondering, is that something you think is specific to the UK and America, and in other countries there would be sort of an expectation, maybe it's a bit of an outdated expectation, that the woman wouldn't want to say, yes, I want to come back to yours, she'd just want you to sort of take the lead. Do you think that's a sort of there's been a cultural like evolution where some countries that would be considered normal because women feel like they're in a certain place in society relative to men? Do you think it's specific to the UK that behaviour is bad, or do you think that's a global thing?
Well, it's difficult to talk about. I mean, definitely what's acceptable in different cultures varies. Sometimes very unhelpfully. I think there are countries where women are a lot more repressed than they are in the UK. So other cultures might have different rules that I would think are even worse than the UK. But I think, this is why this language has evolved. When you say to somebody, do you fancy coming back to mine? It's actually a way of asking them if anything more is on the cards, without having to say, do you want to have sex with me? Yeah. Which I think most women would probably want to avoid, having to spell things out. Yeah, especially because that then creates a feeling of a bit of a contract if you say yes or no.
That's not start on contracts.
No, I know. It's a mess, isn't it? It's a mess. But for me, when somebody says, do you want to come back to mine? There is an implication that they're certainly open to something else happening. I also feel it's not set in stone, and that there should be flexibility around that. But if you, the whole point of saying to somebody, do you want to come back to mine, is basically to ask consent for that next step. So if you're just walking someone back to your house, you haven't asked consent for that. And then you're putting them into a situation where they're socially obliged. If they're not confident in asserting their boundaries, they may feel socially obliged to go with it.
Interesting.
And I think that's conditioned into women.
Yeah.